Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Episode 194, The Tightwire Artist. When doing my bonus episode on May Worth, bonus episode 34, I came across a man called Con Colleano. And I'll be honest, I'd never heard of Con Colleano and thought he would be a very interesting man to research. Particularly as being Australian born, he also achieved much success over in the US. Although he passed away in 1973, over 50 years ago, Con Colleano is today recognised as the world's greatest tightwire artist. Many thanks to Mark St. Leon, Deb Hescott, a descendant of the Colleano family, and Marge Howland for their assistance in creating this episode. Mark St. Leon has some amazing work that he has done. He has written a book, The Wizard of the Wire, the story of Con Colleano in 1993. So many thanks to those three people for really enriching the information that I'm presenting about the Colleano family. In the late 1800s, the Sullivan family, who later adopted the professional name of Colleano, were an itinerant boxing show and a small-time circus and carnival people who wandered the eastern states of Australia, turning up at every kind of country show or race meeting. Cornelius Colleano, Con, who was born Cornelius Sullivan, was born in December 1899 at Lismore in New South Wales, when his father's boxing show visited the town. He was the third child of a family of 10. Con Colleano inherited a rich ethnic mixture, Australian Aboriginal, West Indian and Anglo-Irish, all of which accounted for his almost Italian darkness of face and hair. Young Con's parents were Cornelius Sullivan Sr., also known as Con, and Vitarine Julie Robinson. They had married at Narrabri, New South Wales, in October 1894. Con Sullivan Sr. was a boxing troupe showman, and he hired aspiring young boxers in the cities and took them away to the bush to stand on his line-up boards at country shows to take on any and all challengers. Con's mother, Vitarine, had been born at Narrabri in October 1878. She was the daughter of William Robertson, a shearer and cook, and he was a native of the island of St. Thomas in the West Indies, now part of the Virgin Islands. Vitarine's mother was Julia Saunders, who was the daughter of an English convict, Lambert Saunders, and an Aboriginal mother believed to be Elizabeth, with the tribal name Bootha Emu, who was a native of Weewar in New South Wales. Lambert arrived in Australia on the convict ship Strathfield Say in February 1836. He'd been convicted at the Central Criminal Court for theft and transported for a term of 7 years. His convict description showed that he was 5 foot 9.5 tall. He possessed a ruddy complexion and chestnut eyes. He was assigned to Cyrus Matthew Doyle of Saxville, New South Wales, and he commenced his colonial career as a bullocky, driving bullock drays loaded with wool collected from the outback stations to Sydney to be shipped to London. Lambert's travels brought him as far as Weewar, where he must have formed a relationship with Bertha Emu. In November 1843, Lambert received his certificate of freedom and continued his career as a bullocky. Cornelius Sullivan Sr. had been born in Timor, Victoria in 1872. His birth certificate shows that he was the son of Cornelius Sullivan and Emily Winifred Mullins. They had married at Ballarat earlier in the year of his birth. However, not all birth certificates tell the whole truth. Marge Howland, a family researcher, discovered with the help of DNA that Con Sullivan Sr. had actually been fathered by a miner from Cornwall named John Dunstan Harry. John was a serial womanizer and a bigamist, and Marge established that Harry had fathered numerous children with multiple women in several states of Australia. And John Dunstan Harry is going to have an episode all of his own. The growing family wandered the Australian outback, but there is not much to signpost the family's activities in those years, apart from an old scrap of handed-down information. Later in life, in a short biographical note, the young Con wrote that I gained my first experience in my father's circus touring Australia and did my first act at the age of 3, an act consisting of tricks upon my father's feet. This work, called Risley, was named after the man who originated it. In about 1907, the Sullivan family settled for a time at Lightning Ridge, an opal mining community in far northern New South Wales, so that the eldest of the children could receive some schooling. This settled period allowed Con Sullivan Sr. to teach his children some circus skills. With more girls than boys in the family, Con Sr. seems to have made up his mind to get his family started in the circus business rather than continue with the boxing troupe. Either, though, would have been a hard life, but a circus could be especially lucrative if a family of performers could succeed. Just as in boxing, quick reactions were essential to circus performing, so Con Sullivan Sr. adapted his boxing techniques to train his children as circus performers. One technique that was used was to place a saucer full of sugar on the table and encourage his children to sharpen their reflexes by trying to catch the flies that strayed near it. Eventually, after some 3 years of preparation, the family resumed their travels through the back blocks, now known as a circus that they christened Colleano Brothers Circus. To this day, it's quite common for people in show business to adopt attractive names to replace the names they'd been given at birth. And it was also quite common in Australia's circus people to adopt professional pseudonyms, often inspired by the names of famous artists in the old world. In vaudeville, in England and in the US around the turn of the century, there was a troupe of acrobats called the Colleano family, but spelt Kellino. These Colleanos appeared as a Risley act in New York, according to an item in the New York Clipper on the 19th of September 1908. This same troupe had visited Australia in 1897, so it's highly probable that this group was the inspiration for the Colleano name used by the family, and their name is spelled Collleano. The choice of this attractive Latin-sounded name also allowed the Sullivan children to disguise the dark, swarthy appearance that they inherited from their mother's mixed Aboriginal and West Indian ethnicity. To their unsuspecting patrons throughout the Australian bush and outback, they would pass themselves off as Royal Hawaiians. The first definite reference we have of the Colleano Circus in its own right is a small advertisement that appears in the Waraldo Standard on the 28th of November 1910, and it simply says that Colleano Brothers Circus will play Waralda on race nights. There was a hiatus of nearly 2 years that ensued, where the family movements and show business activities drifted into obscurity. During this period, the family seems to have found employment in establishing circus companies and learning what they could from more experienced performers, developing and expanding their own circus skills. The Colleano children learnt the full range of circus skills. Young Con, for example, learnt to tumble, ride bareback, perform the trapeze, play the trombone and clown. Eventually, however, Con would choose to specialise in the typewire. By 1912, the family were working for Rowan Brothers Circus and featured as the special engagement of the Colleano family. Referring to young Con and his older brother Bonar, the Hillston Spectator remarked, "The Colleano brothers perform one of the most dangerous feats ever performed on the elastic rope, single and double back somersaults, landing on the rope as they first started." The family then joined the King Carnival. The show went north, struggling all the way. Although the carnival did good business in Rockhampton, they went further into outback Queensland, but got stranded and were broke at Winton. At this point, in late 1915, the Colleano family decided to start their own circus once again. They started from Winton in horses and wagons and from there never looked back. By early 1917, the circus was well and truly advertised as Colleano's All-Star Circus. Young Con, his brothers and sisters donned special names for circus bills, a device that was commonly used by small family circuses to inflate the real size of their program and company. Early in his wire-walking career, Con worked under the pseudonym of Zanito. Visiting the Queensland town of Roma in February 1917, the local newspaper, the Western Star, reported, "Of its kind, the Colleano show is one of the best witnessed in Roma for many years. The ladder balancing performance by the Royal Hawaiian troupe was very clever and skillful, and some splendid items were given by the Colleano family of acrobats. The proprietors are to be congratulated on the excellent program they presented to their patrons." Colleano's All-Star Circus had reached Condobolin in mid-western New South Wales by the winter of 1917, where it played in opposition to the Gus St Leon Great United Circus during the local show week. The local newspaper, the Locklander, on the 25th of July 1917 remarked that another clever act is performed by Zanito, the wire walker and tightrope artist, who in addition to numerous and clever feats, turns a complete somersault and lands with his feet on the wire. Con's complete somersault at this stage was the backward somersault, although he was already experimenting with the more difficult forward somersault, but it would take some more years before he perfected this, one of the most difficult and dangerous in the repertoire of circus performing skills. A year later, Colleano's All-Star Circus was sufficiently prosperous to travel the immense state of Queensland by its own special train. The only other circus in Australia to travel regularly by rail at this stage was the nation's largest circus, Worth's, from episode 186. In October 1918, the show business magazine, Australian Variety, reported, Colleano's Circus now travels Queensland by special train. This combination is not the biggest in Australia, but for its size, it is easily one of the most consistently successful. The Colleano family have worked laboriously to achieve fame, and now their dream of ambition is being fulfilled. They have a band of 14 performers, a program of 27 artists, and a fine lot of animals. The big top is a picture of loveliness and has a fine electric lighting system installed. Young Con practiced on the wire up to 7 hours a day. He had no other wire walker to model himself on, and so continued to teach himself in what was perhaps the hardest way possible, on a bounding tight wire, giving flexibility by a coiled spring at one end and without the aid of any balancing device. Not only can the wire sway back and forth, but it can also seriously injure an inexperienced performer attempting to perform acrobatic feats upon it. It became his ambition to perform a forward somersault, feet to feet, on the wire, previously thought impossible, since in turning his somersault, the performer lost sight of the wire. In performing the backward somersault, the performer's eyes sight the wire a split second before alighting on the wire, but the forward somersault is much more difficult. It took young Con about 5 years to perfect the forward somersault on the wire. Finally, one summer's afternoon in Sydney in 1919, he brought off the fabulous forward somersault, probably the first time it's ever been achieved on a tight wire. Nevertheless, Con still missed the wire in 2 out of 3 attempts at the forward somersault. Sometimes he fell, catching the wire under his arm, leaving it paralysed for days. Other times, after turning his somersault, he alighted on the wire on his heels instead of the soles of his feet, causing him to be catapulted into the air again and falling to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Eventually, long experience aided by a sixth perceptory sense that he developed, Con taught his feet to find the wire nearly every time. The evidence suggests that Con perfected the feet-to-feet forward somersault for public performance on the vaudeville circuits in the early 1920s, before departing Australia to seek fame and fortune overseas. The trick nevertheless remained a highly dangerous one, too dangerous to be attempted in the tense atmosphere of a public audience, and for a long time it was the backward somersault that still remained the climax of Con's act. But even this was enough to stir the hearts of his audiences and bring them to the edge of their seats, and not all of them were simple country folk either. In Adelaide, in 1921, it was observed that the Governor of South Australia and his wife visited the Colleano show on Friday evening. After witnessing Zanito do his backward somersault feat on the wire, rose from their seats and went over and personally congratulated him. During those years that Con spent travelling the back blocks with the family circus, he repeatedly turned down offers from the theatre circus of the big Australian cities, such as the Tivoli and the Fuller circuits, until he could offer something that would surpass anything that could be imported from overseas. Con met his future wife, Winnie Travail, of vaudeville soubrette, in Melbourne in 1922 when he was still working in the family circus, and they were soon engaged. Winnie was Winnie Constance Stanley Travail, and she was born in September 1900 in Lambeth, London, England. Winnie immigrated with her parents to Sydney, and she's first recorded in newspapers as performing in 1913, at the age of only 13. She was mainly part of the Fuller's circuit. She did in fact perform earlier than that. She performed in New Zealand at Lyttelton in 1909, where her father's aunts lived. There's reports in the Lyttelton Times in October 1909 detailing that Miss Winnie Travail was appearing in one of the principal roles in a production staged by the Garrick Juvenile Opera Company at the Opera House there. Winnie married Leonard Mendoza on the 15th of August 1919 in Melbourne. When she was 18, Leonard was 6 years older than her. They both stated on their marriage certificate that they were in the occupation of theatrical, and Leonard Mendoza is recorded as going to New York in September 1921. It is said that she met Con when she was 22 in Melbourne. She married Con on the 10th of July 1926 in Michigan, USA, at the age of 25. at the Methodist Church in Detroit, even though they were resident in Brooklyn, New York. They both stated they hadn't been married before. Leonard Mendoza went on to marry in 1935 in California. Con's early costume was merely a top hat and tails, but he began to adopt a Spanish style of dress, evidently with the encouragement of his fiancée. Winnie taught Con the elements of dancing and eventually took a part in his act. The couple presented a rich contrast on stage, Con with his handsome dark features and Winnie with her blonde hair, the proverbial English rose. In 1922, Con did accept an invitation from Jack Musgrove of the Tivoli Theatre Circuit to come down to Sydney for an audition. As well as his forward somersault on the wire, Con showed them a number of other acts on the wire, including one that featured him removing an outer layer of costume as he turned a crutch-to-crutch somersault. The Tivoli immediately engaged Con at a salary of £60 a week. The public went mad about his act. When he finished his contract with Tivoli, he was snapped up by the rival Fuller's Circuit. The magazine The Theatre recorded the following observation of Con's act at Fuller's Sydney Theatre in May 1923. Colleano's dancing on the slack wire at Fuller's Theatre is the prettiest thing to watch. His small feet twinkle gracefully in pirouette and entrechat, alighting always on the wire with an effortless sureness that disguises the difficulty of the act. Colleano's dressing is admirable. His slim figure and almost Italian darkness of face and hair are fittingly set off by a white satin suite. His forward somersault is his star act. He explains that the danger lies in the fact that his feet coming over his head usually obscure his view of the wire, and he has to land in mid-air without seeing his objective. Eventually, Con made arrangements with the Tivoli management to engage the rest of the Colleano family for the circuit. They closed up the circus and came into vaudeville with their acrobatic act. In those days, to add a touch of exoticism, vaudeville acrobats were often presented in Arab costume, and the Colleano family, to its displeasure, was to be no exception. The Tivoli management presented the 8 Colleano children as the Aqaba Arabs. In spite of the Colleano's family disenchantment with its Arab garb, its act was well received, and the troupe subsequently accepted bookings for South Africa, England and America under the Tivoli engagement. It was then that the realisation came upon Con that he had originated a style on the wire that had never been seen before. At the time, his father told the press that the family were expected to be away only 3 years. In fact, once the family settled in the US, they remained there. A few months after the Aqaba Arabs left Australia, Con and his fiancée followed. An article mentions that Con appeared in the Tivoli Theatre in Cape Town during the week commencing 10th of March 1924, and it has been recorded in some international histories of the circus that Con performed his famous forward somersault on the wire before a public audience in Johannesburg. While he performed in Johannesburg, Con adopted the Spanish costume, a toreador style, which was to be the trademark of his wire walking act for the remainder of his career. In New York in September 1924, Con Colleano made his American debut with a week's engagement at the gigantic Hippodrome, under the management of the all-powerful firm Keith Elby, which practically controlled the vaudeville business in the US. John Ringling's agent, Carl Hathaway, saw the act and engaged Con for the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus the following season. His salary with Ringling went up each season, so by the late 1930s, he was earning $1,000 a week, with all expenses paid, and the exceptional privilege of a private compartment on the circus train. Each winter, Con played the vaudeville theatres of America, or toured the music halls and circus buildings of Europe. One of Con's first European engagements was with the circus of the English impresario Bertram Mills. Con performed before Hitler and Mussolini and received a complimentary passport and a medal from each dictator for his efforts. Several times during his career, Con and his wife came back to Australia. The first time, and perhaps the most memorable, was an engagement for the Tivoli Circuit in 1937 for the patriotic revue show 3 Cheers for the Red, White and Blue. Con's act, although essentially the same as when he had left Australia with it early in 1924, had been refined and polished with the years of international exposure in the great circuses and music halls of Europe and North America. By this time, the clouds of war were beginning to gather over Europe. Con and Winnie returned to the US and, as was their custom, toured Europe in between engagements. Their last visit to Europe took place in the summer of 1939, beginning with a 4-week engagement at Berlin's famous variety theatre, the Scala. Con appeared in Rio de Janeiro in 1940 and 1941, in 1942 with the Holland Classical and Cole Brothers circuses, during 1943 with Shrine Circuses, and then in 1944 and 1945 with Cole Brothers Circuses. It was at the end of their 1955 engagement with the Ringling Circus that Con and his wife returned to Australia, but their attempt to settle down was futile. By late 1957, Mr. and Mrs. Con Colleano were back in the US, Con once again performing on The Wire. In 1959, he spent his time with Cristiani Brothers Circus. In his 60th year, Con Colleano eventually retired as a wire walker. Failing eyesight due to the onset of cataract was the basis of his decision. He gave his last performance in Honolulu in 1960 with the E.K. Fernandez Circus, hardly noticed as he was now an outer ring attraction in this three-ring circus. After his retirement, Con and his wife settled in Florida. In 1966, Con received the supreme honour of the American Circus World, election into the Circus Hall of Fame. Con and Winnie ultimately lost all their money indulging in a luxurious lifestyle, giving it away to friends, and they also made a disastrous investment in a pub in outback Australia in the 1950s. Con Colleano died of a heart attack on Tuesday, November the 12th, 1973, at his home in South Miami, Florida. He was 73. His sister-in-law is quoted as saying his wife, Winnie, has cabled that she is broken-hearted because she found my dear brother-in-law lying dead. Obviously, she is too shocked to tell me more. His widow, Winnie, died at a private hospital in Sydney, New South Wales on the 5th of January 1986. In everything that Con performed on The Wire, there was an integrity and style found only amongst the greatest performers. He brought a new excitement and aesthetic satisfaction to circus. In 1997, the Australia Post released a postage stamp featuring Con Colleano, an official recognition of sorts of an Australian true circus star. A documentary, soon to be released, called The Colleano Heart, was filmed in America, as well as Narrabri and Lightning Ridge. And I'll put a link up in my show notes and on the Facebook page so you can see a small clip introducing this documentary. A little on Con's siblings. The firstborn in the family was Elgar James Sullivan, his stage name being Bonar Colleano. He was born on the 29th of December 1894 in Narrabri, New South Wales. He married Ruby May Brown, who was 10 years younger than Elgar, in South Africa in about 1923. Ruby had been born in Victoria. They had a son, Bonar William. Bonar started off in the family circus and then became a well-known stage and film actor in Britain in the 1940s and 50s. Bonar died aged only 34 when he crashed his Jaguar. Bonar married twice, but also had two further children with two other women, one before his first marriage and one between his first and second marriage. He also had a son, Mark, who was an actor. Elgar was naturalised as an American citizen on the 28th of September 1928. By 1939, they were living in England, where Bonar's occupation was listed as a comedian. And Bonar died in March 1957 at Westminster in London, aged 62, only 15 months before his son Bonar died. The next child was Emily Winifred Sullivan, known as Winnie, who was born on the 3rd of June 1897 in Lismore, New South Wales. Winnie was an exceptional trapeze performer. She had a son, James, in Massachusetts, USA, when she was 20, in December 1917. She married Harold Brown in 1940 in Pennsylvania, when she was 43 and Harold 48. She featured in the Morton Circus in Toronto, Canada, performing the single Aerial in 1942. And Winnie died on the 22nd of February 1973 in Miami, Florida, aged 75. The next sibling was Catherine Julia Sullivan, known as Kay, who was born on the 10th of September 1901 at Brigalow Creek, near Goondiwindi in Queensland. She married James Hugh O'Donnell in Pennsylvania, USA, and they had 5 children. And an article in 1948 in Pennsylvania says circus to feature stadium opening at Allentown. A 3-ring, 2-stage circus produced and directed by Kay Colleano, sister of Con Colleano, tightwire artist, will be the feature of the gala opening of Allentown's new $1 million stadium. Kay Colleano is the wife of James H. O'Donnell, formerly with Ringling. The circus will be sponsored by the Athletic Council of the Allentown School District. Acts include Jimmy Colleano, nephew of Con, who works the tightwire, and an aerial ballet composed of 40 local girls trained by Kay Colleano. Rumour has it that Kay Colleano plans to take the show on the road under canvas next year and already is busy contracting acts. And Kay passed away in March 1967 in Dade, Florida, aged 64. And there was an obituary in the paper. Kay Colleano of the world-famed Colleano circus family, wife of Allentown's James H. O'Donnell, died Sunday in Miami. She and her husband were visiting her sister, Mrs. Winifred Brown, when she was stricken. She died at Mount Sinai Hospital. Like her brothers and sisters, she adopted the name of Colleano for show business purposes in her native Australia. The Colleano family had won fame as circus aerialists and acrobats before it was known in America. Mrs. O'Donnell and other members of the Colleano family came to the US in 1924, settling in New York, where they were employed by the then Ringling Brothers Circus. They were headliners for a number of years. She met her husband, who also travelled with the circus as an acrobat and tumbler, and they became residents of Allentown, O'Donnell's original home, in 1926. They have lived in Fullerton since 1959. Besides her husband, she's survived by 3 daughters, Mrs. Julia Valentine of LA, Catherine, wife of John Stellan, at home, and Winifred, wife of Paul Webber, Allentown, and 2 sons, James and Philip. Also surviving are 18 grandchildren, 5 sisters and 4 brothers. The next sibling was Morris Daniel Sullivan, who was born on the 28th of April 1904 in Narrabri, New South Wales. He married Elsie Bauer. Morris performed in pantomimes, variety shows, and he was a stage comedian. On the 25th of February 1943, from the London Palladium, it says Morris Colleano of the half-Irish, half-Spanish circus act, the Colleano family, walks through the air as part of their variety bill showing at the London Palladium. In 1945, he was on the bill at a command performance for the King and Queen, and in 1946 performed at Finsbury Park in a show performing tumbling, acrobatics and dancing. And the announcement of this says Morris Colleano and the Colleano family, tumbling, acro and dancing, are featured in the revue Hip Hip Hooray at the Empire, Finsbury Park, London. And in 1948 he featured in London on September the 25th. Con Colleano Wirewalk is set for London appearance. And it mentions Con Colleano featuring as a sign-up for Tom Arnold's Christmas Circus at the Haringey Arena, and that he'd been touring the Stolz circuit of ward houses in the British Isle and played 2 dates at the London Palladium. And it says last week Colleano shared honours at the Empire in Glasgow with his brother's act, Morris Colleano and family, made up of members of the Colleano family. In 1949 he travelled with his wife Elsie and brother Lynn to Australia. They toured for the Tivoli from 1949 to 1951, and again in 1958. They also performed in New Zealand in 1949. And it was his first time back in Australia for 20 years. On the 19th of May 1949 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, it says models and mink for Tivoli Star. Mrs. Morris Colleano, wife of a member of the famous Colleano circus pioneers in Australia, arrived in Sydney yesterday wearing a full-length mink coat with a wardrobe trunk of Hartnell and Molyneux designed models to wear in the new Tivoli show Starry Nights. Mrs. Colleano, who with her Australian-born husband is a Royal Command performer and is a member of the family comedy, dancing and acrobatic act. Brothers Lynn and George Colleano and George's wife Joyce are other members of the act. Each of her Molyneux and Hartnell gowns has a miniature replica made by the designers for her 14-year-old niece, Jasmine Bauer, who arrived in Sydney with her aunt. Jasmine joined the act 18 months ago and is too young, according to New South Wales law, to perform in Sydney, so she will catch up on her studies before the show moves on to Brisbane. Mrs. Colleano said yesterday that she had appeared in the last Royal Command performance show in England before the war, and that her husband appeared in the first Royal Command show after the war in 1945. Mrs. Colleano is the proud possessor of a diamond, ruby and emerald pendant marked with initials MR. The pendant was a gift from Queen Mary, presented after her command performance at the Glasgow Exposition in 1937. I have played the piano quite a lot since for Queen Mary, Mrs. Colleano said, and on Christmas Day my niece and I were guests at the screening of baby Prince Charles at Buckingham Palace. The Colleanos gave more than 2,000 shows for troops in England during the war. Mrs. Colleano said her most thrilling performance was on an English dockside on the eve of D-Day to an audience of troops who were embarking for the Normandy landing. We gave 11 complete concerts that night from late afternoon to 4 a.m. the next morning. The boys were feeling pretty serious when we arrived, but I think we cheered them up a bit. The Colleanos' lovely 6-acre estate, Riverdale at Uxbridge, housed high-ranking RAF officers from nearby Uxbridge Station during the war. The Battle of Britain was directed from my morning room, says Mrs. Colleano. Mrs. Colleano visited Australia in 1927 when she was billed at the Old Tivoli Theatre in Sydney, with stars including Olsen and Johnson. But then she did not have much time to see the country, she said. Morris and Elsie Colleano would take a caravan trip in Australia. Morris has not been home since 1923, so one of their first stops will be his hometown of Narrabri. Morris was born in New South Wales and was one of a family of 10 who are now all in show business. His father, Con Colleano, pioneered Australia with his circus and then went abroad with his family when Morris was 17. And in Newcastle, New South Wales in 1950, Colleano tops at Stadium. The Stadium Theatre may have got away to a mediocre start with its first show, Hellers a Poppin', but its latest, Command Performance, was open last night and it more than makes amends. The concentrated clowning of its principal star, Morris Colleano, lifts it to a high standard. Colleano is top of his class. Once word gets around of his patter, acrobatics and refreshing routines, with Joyce, George and Lynn Colleano, seats at the Stadium will be at a premium for the remaining 3 nights of the season. English comedian Elsie Bauer, who appears firstly with songs at the piano and later in a rollicking sequence with Morris Colleano, is another of the production's highlights. With all the highly polished ability and confidence of the real trooper, she has the audience with her from the start and makes a perfect team with Colleano. Command Performance has a tenor, an amusing lightning cartoonist, impressionists, jugglers, acrobatics, a roller skating act, and an unusual ventriloquial act. But without question, it is Colleano's show. Morris passed away in September 1974 at Chichester, Sussex, in England, aged 70. Con's next sibling was Virginia May Evelyn Sullivan, who was born on the 16th of May 1906 in Narrabri, New South Wales. She married Harry Edward Greer in New York City in February 1924 when she was 17 and Harry 18. Harry and May, along with Harry's parents, Joseph and Edna, owned a rodeo riding outfit called Greer's Western Rodeo and Society Circus, which provided horses and riders to Ringling Circus, Golmar Brothers and Sells Floto Circuses. Based out of Bloomington, Wisconsin, the Greers were trick riders. May performed part of an acrobatics act. Harry and May then took the business over. They had a daughter, Jo May Joyce, on the 11th of August 1929 in Lancaster, Wisconsin. By 1940, Harry had remarried, and Virginia married William Clement in about the late 1960s. And May died on the 2nd of May 1994 at Palm Beach, Florida, aged 87. The next sibling was Coralie Victorine Sullivan, known as Coral, who was born on the 17th of June 1908 in Narrabri. She married Daniel O'Donnell on the 9th of February 1929 in Allentown, Pennsylvania. They had 4 children, and she died on the 21st of December 1979 in Dade, Florida, aged 71. The next sibling was Thelma Joyce Sullivan, who was born on the 20th of November 1910 in Narrabri. She married Sergeant Harold Smith in the US in 1935, but by 1939 she was living with her brother Bonar in England and working as a dancer. She then married Gaston Palmer, a famous French juggler, in July 1947 in Middlesex, England, and they had 3 children. They lived on the French Riviera, and Thelma rubbed shoulders with famous movie actors. She joined her brother Morris and his wife on a tour of Australia in 1951. And there's a mention of Thelma as well as other family members in a short article. The Colleano show, which opened at the Theatre Royal on Saturday, made for one of the best staged there. Although Morris Colleano, a clever comic and acrobat, was the pivot of the show, every unit was a distinct success in itself. Whether it was Lynn, George or the vivacious Joyce Colleano, the reception was the same. Other members of the company, Elsie Bauer and Jasmine, who was making her first stage appearance, were also well received. And on the 17th of December 1958, in the Australian Woman's Weekly, it talks about Gaston Palmer, Joyce's second husband. Juggler lives in Valentino's French villa. Plump, fast-talking juggler Gaston Palmer suns between tours in a rambling French Riviera villa once owned by Rudolph Valentino. When Gaston bought the house in 1938, it was furnished as it had been when the great lover of American movie screens lived there. Gaston, who was on a vaudeville tour of Australia, said the villa contained nothing to indicate who had been the previous occupant. He lives in France but retains his British citizenship. He explained, "My father, also a juggler, came from Yorkshire, and my mother was a Parisian circus rider. I was born in Marseille but didn't learn to speak English before we visited America. So now I speak English like an American with a French accent." Gaston can do his act in English, French, Spanish, Swedish, Italian and Dutch, and he's equally voluble in all 6 tongues. "I never rehearse. I let the audience give me my lines. If I say something that makes them laugh, I say it again and I remember it. Juggling is a difficult act in which to achieve perfection. Gaston recalled how he practiced arduously for years until one day on stage, the awful nightmare of all jugglers overtook him and he muffed a vital catch. He covered it up with an old joke and the audience thought it was wonderful. From there on, I practice no more. I find it better to miss one once in a while. Now I never know when my track is going to come off. When I changed my act, I caused 10 times more misery than when I never missed a trick. Gaston is married to Joyce Colleano, an Australian acrobatic dancer of the famous vaudeville Colleano family, and aunt of film star Bonar Colleano, who was killed in a car crash last August. She is 20 years younger than Gaston. Mrs. Palmer planned to come with Gaston on the tour, but is remaining with her sister in America because Australian quarantine regulations would not allow her French Pekingese dog to be with them. Gaston has made several pictures in France and has given 3 command performances for Prince Rainier and Princess Grace of Monaco. His villa is 6 miles south of Cannes and an hour drive from Monaco. He said, "If I see Princess Grace out shopping, she will stop her car and shake hands like anyone would. She is an American, of course, very, very democratic. Rainier is the same. Everyone in Monaco thinks he is a good man because he is so good to the poor." Gaston died in 1969, and then Joyce went on to marry Carl Charles Macario in Florida on the 8th of January 1992 when she was 82, and Joyce died on the 13th of December 2001 at Dania, Broward County, Florida, at the age of 91. Another sibling, Victoria Henrietta Sullivan, known as Babe to the family, was born on the 11th of March 1913 in Lismore, New South Wales. There was a mention of her in New York City in 1949 where it says, "The Toria Colleano package has been bought for a 12-week date at the Four Freedoms Theatre in Atlantic City." She married Herbert Robbins on the 30th of July 1935 in New York. They had 2 children, and she then married Ralph Moser. She died on the 22nd of October 1986 at Fairfax, Virginia, aged 73. Another sibling was Victor Lindsay Sullivan, known as Lynn, who was born on the 20th of April 1917 in Narrabri. Lindsay married Margaret Crowther in Yorkshire, England in April 1941 when he was 24 and Margaret 18, and they had 4 children. In 1949, there's an article that says Australian in England failed to report. In London on the 10th of August, charged at Newcastle with having failed to report for military service, Lindsay Sullivan, an Australian music hall artist, pleaded that he had never tried to dodge service. He thought an Australian citizen had to be 2 years in Britain before being liable for service. Sullivan was remanded in custody for military escort. And in 1949, he did a tour of Australia. It says Principals of Starry Nights arrived in Adelaide this morning and gave their first performance at the Theatre Royal. And it features Lynn on the left and then Elsie Bauer, as well as Maurice Colleano, included in the photo. And mentions of Lynn being out in Australia with his family. Lynn Colleano, youngest of the well-known Australian theatrical family, bowed in at the Theatre Royal yesterday. His acrobatics showed he had followed the family's footsteps in show business. Many of his twists and turns were new. For a breather, he told funny stories. And Lynn Colleano, who will be Mother Goose in the Worth Circus pantomime that opens on Boxing Day, knows his way around the world. A Bachelor of Civil Engineering, Notre Dame University, he once played 2 seasons of professional football with the Philadelphia Eagles. In the last war, he served in the British Army as a warrant officer in a specialist outfit, the Army Physical Training Corps. He won the Army Lightweight Heavy Boxing Championship in 1946. Lynn married Nellie Stewart in 1951 in Brisbane when he was 34, and it says 200 minutes was the time taken for the wedding celebrations of theatre personalities Nellie Stewart and Lynn Colleano in Brisbane this week. The couple were married at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, and Nellie, a dancer in The Highwayman, had to change to get married, attend a reception between afternoon and evening shows. And it says, in traditional style, acrobat Lynn Colleano carried his bride dancer Nellie Stewart over the threshold last night after their wedding at the Methodist Church. They entertained a few friends privately after the show. And the honeymoon? And Lynn responded with, "That's a bit indefinite. Maybe we'll get parts together in a review show this year. In the meantime, we'll be going on working in different shows." They left Sydney in November 1952 and returned to London. And in 1953, Lynn was working with an ice skating company in Melbourne, Victoria at the Princess Theatre. At some stage, he was also with Sheila Russell, who was English. They had 3 children together. Sheila was 12 years younger than Lindsay, and Lindsay died in 1968 in Chiswick, England, aged 51. So I hope you enjoyed the story on the Colleano family. Please go and delve further into Mark St. Leon's book that he has written on this family, and look out for the documentary that is going to be released soon. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.